My jealous brother framed me and lied to get me kicked out of our family business. Hey Reddit, I'm Jake, 28 years old, and I've been through a hell of a lot in the past couple of years. I've always been the hard worker, the guy who put his head down and did what needed to be done. I wasn't looking for drama or trying to step on anyone's toes, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect it. Especially when those curveballs come from someone you never thought would betray you. This is the story of how my older brother, Matt, who's 32, lied, framed me, and got me kicked out of our family business. It's been a roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and hard-won lessons, but I've finally found my footing again. Let me take you back to the beginning. Growing up in my family was all about business, specifically, our family business. My dad, Tom, who's now in his late 50s, built our company, Johnson & Sons, from the ground up. It started as a small local plumbing service, just one man with a truck and a toolbox, hustling to get jobs in our small town. My dad worked day and night, often missing out on holidays and weekends to make sure there was food on the table and that the business was thriving. He poured every ounce of his energy into it, and slowly but surely, the business grew into something substantial, a full-service home maintenance company with a fleet of vans, a dedicated team of workers, and a solid reputation that stretched across our county. From as far back as I can remember, the business was like a third sibling in our house. My dad would bring home stacks of paperwork that cluttered the dining room table, and dinner conversations were more about the latest job bids and supply costs than anything else. Our mom, Linda, who was in her early 50s and worked as a part-time bookkeeper, handled the administrative side of things, making sure the bills were paid and the accounts balanced. She was the quiet backbone of the company, never seeking the spotlight but always making sure the gears were turning smoothly. Dad had high hopes for Matt and me. He often talked about how one day, the business would be ours to run. It wasn't a question of if, it was a given. He'd constantly remind us that everything he was doing was for our future, and in return, he expected us to follow in his footsteps. From a young age, Matt and I were expected to pitch in, helping with odd jobs, cleaning tools, and riding along with Dad to learn the ropes. Matt, being 4 years older, always seemed more suited for the business. He had Dad's charm and confidence, and he loved being in the thick of things, whether it was negotiating deals with clients or directing the crew on a job site. He was the golden boy, the one everyone looked to as the future leader of the company. Our parents doted on him, proud of his natural charisma and leadership skills. I remember how they'd always brag about Matt at family gatherings, telling everyone how he was going to take the company to new heights. I was different. I was quieter, more analytical, and less interested in being the center of attention. While Matt loved working in the field and talking shop with the guys, I preferred working behind the scenes. I was the one who kept track of the finances, organized the schedules, and made sure we never missed a deadline. I loved the feeling of solving problems, of putting all the pieces together to make sure everything ran smoothly. I didn't mind that I wasn't the one getting the glory. I was content knowing I was a crucial part of the operation, even if no one else saw it. But being in Matt's shadow wasn't always easy. He was the loud, charismatic leader, and I was the dependable sidekick. It didn't bother me much at first. I was proud of the work we were doing and felt that we complemented each other. But as we got older, it became clear that Matt's ambitions were bigger than just being a partner. He wanted to be the boss. And slowly but surely, he started pushing me out of the picture. It was little things at first, Matt taking credit for jobs I'd organized or dismissing my input during meetings. He'd make jokes at my expense, subtle digs that made me feel small, and I'd brush it off, convincing myself it was just sibling rivalry. But deep down, it hurt. I was putting in just as much work as he was, if not more, but it felt like my efforts were constantly being overshadowed by Matt's charm and my dad's unwavering belief in him. Our dad, who was always more focused on the big picture, didn't seem to notice the tension growing between us. He was so proud of Matt's ability to close deals and bring in new clients that he overlooked the fact that Matt wasn't always pulling his weight on the operational side. My contributions often went unnoticed, dismissed as just the stuff that had to get done. But to me, those details were everything. They were what kept the business afloat. By the time I was 25, Dad officially brought Matt and me into the business as full-time partners. The plan was for us to work our way up, learn every aspect of the company, and eventually take over as equals. I was excited for the opportunity, ready to prove myself and help the company grow. But it quickly became clear that Matt wasn't interested in sharing power. He wanted to be in charge, and he'd stop at nothing to make that happen. As our responsibilities grew, so did the tension between us. Matt began undermining me at every turn, questioning my decisions in front of the crew, and belittling my ideas during meetings. He was always the first to jump in and take credit when things went right, but he'd be nowhere to be found when problems arose. I'd be the one staying late to fix the issues, while Matt would be out celebrating our success like it was all his doing. Despite everything, I kept my head down and focused on the work. I loved the business and wanted to see it succeed, even if it meant putting up with Matt's antics. I'd remind myself that we were a family, and that no matter how bad things got, we were in this together. But as time went on, it became clear that Matt didn't see it that way. He saw me as a threat, an obstacle in his path to total control, and he was willing to do whatever it took to push me out. I just didn't realize how far he was willing to go until it was too late. The beginning of the end started when we landed a huge contract with one of the biggest property management companies in the city. This wasn't just another job, it was a game changer. The contract was worth millions and had the potential to secure our company's financial future for years to come. My dad was ecstatic, and for the first time, he put me in charge of overseeing the project. It was my chance to prove myself, to show that I was more than just the guy behind the scenes. I threw myself into the project with everything I had. I coordinated with suppliers, managed the budget, and kept our crew on a tight schedule to ensure we met all the deadlines. It was a massive undertaking, but I thrived under the pressure. I spent countless late nights at the office, going over every detail to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. I was determined to make this project a success, not just for the business, but to prove to myself that I could handle the big leagues. But while I was putting in the work, Matt was busy playing a different game. Instead of helping with the day-to-day operations, Matt spent most of his time wining and dining the clients, attending networking events, and schmoozing with anyone who could boost his profile. He'd show up to the job site for a few hours, make a big show of barking orders, and then disappear for the rest of the day. I didn't mind picking up the slack, I was used to it, but I could feel the strain of carrying the entire project on my own. As the project progressed, things started to go wrong. Supplies would go missing, critical equipment would break down, and unexpected costs kept piling up. I was constantly scrambling to keep everything on track, and no matter how hard I tried, it felt like I was always 2 steps behind. The budget was spiraling out of control, and I couldn't figure out why. I started noticing strange discrepancies in our financial records, payments that didn't match up, invoices that were duplicated, and charges that made no sense. I'd always been meticulous with the numbers, so it was baffling to see the books in such disarray. I spent hours trying to reconcile the accounts, combing through every transaction to find the source of the problem. But the more I dug, the more confusing it became. I brought my concerns to my dad, showing him the discrepancies and explaining that something wasn't adding up. He seemed worried, but before we could dig any deeper, Matt swooped in with a casual smile and a reassuring tone. "Don't worry, Dad," Matt said, brushing off my concerns. "It's just a mix-up. I've been keeping an eye on things, and I'll sort it out." My dad nodded, taking Matt's word for it without question. I felt a surge of frustration. I knew something was wrong, and I was desperate to figure out what it was. But Matt's dismissive attitude and my dad's unwavering trust in him made it impossible to get any answers. I felt like I was being gaslit, my legitimate concerns brushed aside as if they were nothing more than paranoia. Then came the day that everything came crashing down. I walked into the office one morning to find my dad sitting behind his desk, looking angrier than I'd ever seen him. Matt was there too, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a look of smug satisfaction on his face. "Jake," my dad started, his voice tight with anger. "We need to talk about the missing funds." I froze, my mind racing. "What missing funds?" Dad threw down a stack of papers on the desk: bank statements, falsified invoices, and doctored emails. According to the documents, thousands of dollars had been siphoned from the business into a separate account under my name. The implication was clear: I'd been embezzling money from the company, lining my pockets at the expense of the business I'd worked so hard to build. I was stunned. I'd never touched that money, never done anything to betray the business or my family. I tried to explain, to tell my dad that I didn't know how this had happened, but he cut me off, his face contorted with rage. "Matt found this," Dad said, pointing to my brother. "He's been going through the books, and this is what he uncovered. How could you do this to us, Jake?" I looked at Matt, who was watching me with a cold, calculating expression. He shook his head, feigning disappointment as he played the role of the dutiful son who'd uncovered the truth. It was all an act, a carefully orchestrated plan to frame me and get me out of the way. Matt had manipulated the numbers, planted fake evidence, and set me up to take the fall. I tried to defend myself, showing my dad the real records and pointing out the discrepancies, but it was no use. Matt had already poisoned the well, and my dad wasn't listening. To him, I was a thief who'd betrayed his trust, and no amount of protesting was going to change his mind. "You need to leave," my dad said, his voice laced with disappointment. "I can't have someone I can't trust running this business." Those words hit me harder than any punch ever could. My dad, the man I'd looked up to my entire life, was looking at me like I was nothing more than a stranger. I packed up my things in a daze, my mind spinning as I tried to process what had just happened. As I walked out of the office, Matt followed me, leaning in close with a smug whisper. "It's just business, little brother," he said with a smirk. "You were never cut out for this." I walked out without looking back, my heart shattered and my future uncertain. My own brother, the person I trusted most, had stabbed me in the back and taken everything from me. And the worst part was, no one seemed to care. Getting kicked out of the family business felt like losing a part of myself. One day, I was a respected member of the team, working toward a shared dream, and the next, I was cast out, branded as a thief and a traitor. The shame and humiliation were overwhelming. My own father believed I'd betrayed him, and Matt's lies had spread like wildfire among the crew and our extended family. I tried to reach out to my dad in the weeks that followed, desperate to clear my name and explain my side of the story. But he wouldn't take my calls. I sent emails, wrote letters, and even showed up at his house unannounced, but every attempt to talk was met with cold indifference. My dad was hurt, angry, and unwilling to see past the evidence Matt had fabricated. He'd made up his mind, and nothing I said could change it. My mom was caught in the middle, torn between her loyalty to my dad and her desire to believe me. She'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept the family together. But this time, even she couldn't bridge the divide. Matt had convinced her that I was guilty, that I was just trying to deflect blame, and she didn't know what to believe. Our conversations were stilted, awkward, and filled with tension. She'd ask if I was okay, but there was always a distance, an underlying suspicion that hadn't been there before. I felt completely alone. My social circle, which had once revolved around the business, was now fractured. Friends and colleagues who I'd considered family were suddenly distant, unsure of where they stood or what to believe. Some of them reached out, offering vague words of support, but most just stayed away, not wanting to get involved in the drama. The financial impact was devastating. I'd poured everything into the family business, investing my time, money, and heart into making it a success. Now, I had nothing. I couldn't find a job in my field, my reputation had been tainted by the scandal, and no one wanted to hire someone with allegations of embezzlement hanging over their head. I was forced to take whatever work I could find, doing odd jobs, manual labor, and anything that would keep me afloat. It was humbling going from managing a business to barely making ends meet, but I didn't have a choice. I had to keep going, even if every step felt like a struggle. I moved in with my best friend, Dave, who was the only person who stood by me without question. We'd been friends since high school, and he knew the kind of person I was. He let me crash on his couch, never asking for anything in return, and gave me the space I needed to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Dave's unwavering support was a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't completely alone, even when everything else felt hopeless. I spent months trying to clear my name, obsessively combing through financial records and trying to piece together the truth. I hired a forensic accountant, hoping to uncover the evidence that would expose Matt's lies, but Matt had been meticulous. Every false transaction, every doctored document, had been expertly crafted to implicate me and cover his own tracks. I hit wall after wall, and every failed attempt to prove my innocence felt like another blow. Meanwhile, Matt was thriving. He'd taken over the business, positioning himself as the savior who'd rooted out corruption and restored order. He was in the local papers, giving interviews and talking about the new direction of the company, all while basking in the praise and recognition that came with being the man in charge. Seeing his smug face plastered everywhere was like a knife in my gut. He'd won, and there was nothing I could do to change that. The worst part wasn't losing the job, it was losing my family. My dad, who'd been my mentor and role model, now saw me as a stranger. My mom, who'd always been my biggest supporter, looked at me with a mix of pity and disappointment. And Matt, my own brother, was the architect of my downfall, happily basking in the success he'd stolen from me. It felt like everything I'd ever worked for had been ripped away, and I was powerless to fix it. I hit rock bottom about 6 months after being kicked out. I was broke, exhausted, and filled with a bitterness that I couldn't shake. I'd wake up every day feeling like a failure, haunted by the nagging thought that maybe Matt was right, that maybe I really wasn't cut out for this. The anger and frustration festered, eating away at my self-worth and leaving me questioning everything. But in the midst of all that darkness, something shifted. I realized that I couldn't keep living in Matt's shadow, defined by his lies and the betrayal that had torn my life apart. I had a choice: I could either let this destroy me, or I could find a way to rebuild. And as hard as it was, I decided that I wasn't going to let Matt's actions dictate the rest of my life. I'd lost my place in the family business, but I hadn't lost my skills, my work ethic, or my determination. I still had something to offer, and I was going to prove it to myself, if no one else. Starting over was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it was also the most liberating. With Dave's encouragement, I decided to launch my own small plumbing and handyman service. It wasn't the grand vision of Johnson & Sons, but it was a fresh start, something that was mine and mine alone. I scraped together what little savings I had left, borrowed tools from Dave, and started working out of my old truck. It was a humble beginning, but it was something. The first few months were a grind. I put up flyers around town, created a basic website, and hustled to get my name out there. I'd wake up before dawn, drive around to job sites, and spend long hours doing everything from fixing leaky faucets to unclogging drains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and every small job felt like a step in the right direction. I quickly learned that running a business on my own was nothing like working in the family company. There was no safety net, no one to back me up when things went wrong. I was the marketer, the accountant, the laborer, and the manager all rolled into one. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, doubting my ability to make it work. But each time I thought about quitting, I'd remember Matt's smug grin, his condescending words echoing in my mind, "You were never cut out for this." That memory became my fuel. I was determined to prove him wrong. Slowly but surely, my hard work started to pay off. Word of mouth spread, and I began to build a loyal client base. People appreciated my dedication, my attention to detail, and my commitment to doing the job right. I prided myself on being honest, transparent, and reliable, values that I'd always held, but that had been overshadowed by Matt's manipulations. My clients saw the real me, and their trust helped me regain confidence that I thought I'd lost forever. As my business grew, I started taking on more complex projects, hiring a few part-time workers to help with the increased demand. I invested in better equipment, expanded my services, and began to feel like I was truly in control of my future. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, building something meaningful from the ground up. Each new job, each satisfied client, felt like a small victory, proof that I was more than Matt's lies. I also made it a point to get involved in the community that had supported me. I volunteered my services to local nonprofits, offering free repairs to low-income families and helping out at community events. I wanted to give back, to show that I wasn't just some guy who'd been framed. I was a business owner who cared about the people around him. It was my way of reclaiming my reputation, not through empty words or grand gestures, but through real, tangible actions. Around this time, I reconnected with my parents. It wasn't easy, our relationship had been strained to the breaking point, and I was still carrying a lot of resentment. But as the months passed, my dad reached out, expressing a desire to talk. He admitted that he'd been wrong, that he'd let Matt manipulate him, and that he regretted pushing me away. It was a hard conversation, filled with tears, anger, and a lot of raw emotions, but it was a start. My dad's apology didn't fix everything, it couldn't undo the damage that had been done. But it was a step toward healing, and I appreciated the effort. We began to rebuild our relationship, slowly and cautiously, with an understanding that we couldn't go back to the way things were. My mom, too, started to see through Matt's facade, recognizing that she'd been caught up in his lies. It was bittersweet watching my parents come to terms with the truth, but it also felt like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. As for Matt, he was facing his own set of challenges. The business he'd fought so hard to control was struggling under his mismanagement. He'd burned bridges with suppliers, alienated key clients, and squandered resources on flashy marketing schemes that never panned out. I'd hear whispers from former colleagues about how Matt was desperately trying to keep things afloat, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. He'd taken everything from me, but in the end, his lies had only hurt himself. I kept my distance from Matt, choosing to focus on my own journey. I didn't need revenge or an apology, I just needed to move forward. Our paths had diverged, and I was determined to make the most of my second chance. Update 1 year later. OP, my brother framed me and got me kicked out of our family business. Here's how I fought back. It's been a year since my brother Matt framed me and got me kicked out of our family business. I've spent the last year rebuilding my life from the ground up, starting my own small plumbing service after being accused of something I didn't do. It's been tough, but I've managed to build a steady stream of clients who appreciate my hard work and dedication. My dad recently reached out to apologize for believing Matt's lies, and while it meant a lot to hear him say it, I've realized that I don't need his validation to move forward. I've learned that I can build something great on my own, without needing to be part of the family business that turned its back on me. Matt's now dealing with the consequences of his actions, and the business he fought so hard to control is struggling. I've kept my distance, focused on my own path, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. To anyone out there dealing with betrayal from family, don't give up. You're stronger than you think, and there's always a way forward. Top comment. Wow, Opie, I'm so sorry you went through that. It's amazing that you've managed to turn things around and build something of your own despite everything. Your brother might have tried to tear you down, but it sounds like you've come out stronger on the other side. Keep going, you've got this. Opie's response. Thank you. It's been a rough road, but I'm learning that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really made of. I appreciate the support. I'm not where I thought I'd be, but I'm proud of how far I've come. As time went on, my business continued to grow. I hired a few full-time employees, upgraded my equipment, and expanded my services beyond basic plumbing to include home repairs, renovations, and small construction projects. My clients appreciated the personalized touch I brought to every job, and the word of mouth continued to spread. I was no longer just the guy trying to scrape by, I was building a solid, reputable business that people could rely on. I also started mentoring young apprentices who were interested in learning the trade. I remembered how much I'd learned from my dad growing up, and I wanted to pass on that knowledge to the next generation. I took on a few eager high school kids, teaching them the skills they needed to succeed and emphasizing the importance of honesty, integrity, and hard work. It was incredibly rewarding to see them develop, knowing that I was helping shape their futures in a positive way. In addition to growing my business, I focused on rebuilding my personal life. I reconnected with friends who distanced themselves during the fallout, and we picked up where we'd left off, stronger and closer than before. They saw the work I was putting into my business, the effort to reclaim my reputation, and they supported me every step of the way. I also started dating again, albeit cautiously. I'd been burned by the betrayal of my family, and it took time to trust anyone again. But eventually, I met someone who showed me that there was still goodness in the world. Her name was Sarah, a 30-year-old architect with a sharp wit and a kind heart. She was smart, driven, and unlike anyone I'd ever dated. Sarah knew about everything that had happened with Matt and my family, and she never judged me for it. Instead, she encouraged me to keep pushing forward, to focus on the future rather than the past. Sarah and I built a relationship based on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. She was my biggest supporter, always cheering me on during the highs and comforting me during the lows. We moved in together, adopted a rescue dog named Max, and started planning a future that wasn't defined by the mistakes of others. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As my business continued to thrive, I made it a point to give back to the community that had supported me through my darkest times. I sponsored local youth programs, donated my services to families in need, and volunteered at community events. I wanted to be more than just a business owner. I wanted to be a positive force in my community, someone who gave as much as he received. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out my home office, I came across a stack of old photos from my time at the family business. There were pictures of me and Matt working side by side, our dad beaming with pride as he watched us carry on his legacy. Looking at those photos, I felt a mix of nostalgia and sadness. I missed the days when we were a teen, when we were working toward the same goal. But I also realized that those days were gone, and I had to let go of the anger that had been holding me back. I put the photos away, not out of bitterness, but as a way of acknowledging that part of my life was over. I'd moved on, and I was building something new, something that was mine and mine alone. Sarah and I got engaged on a quiet beach at sunset, surrounded by close friends and family who had been there through it all. It was a simple, intimate moment that symbolized everything we'd built together, a future full of love, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. We got married in a small ceremony and started planning for the next chapter of our lives. Looking back, I realized that being kicked out of the family business was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to confront my own insecurities, to build something from nothing, and to prove to myself that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. I'd lost a lot, but I gained something far more valuable, a sense of independence, resilience, and the knowledge that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. I'd finally stepped out of Matt's shadow, and I wasn't looking back.